In this video, I'm going to talk about some of the issues relating to addiction and why it can be hard to change addiction behaviours. This is in relation to all addiction behaviours, not just those involving substances. Just to be clear, when I refer to addictive or addiction behaviour, this includes behaviour around substance use. It is commonly agreed there are 10 signs of addiction. 1. The behaviour is uncontrollable despite attempts at control. 2. There are negative and self-destructive consequences to varying and escalating degrees as a result of the behaviour. 3. Despite these negative consequences, the person experiences extreme difficulty when trying to change. 4. The behaviour continues in spite of the person's persistent desire to stop. 5. The person can become secretive and make attempts to hide the addictive behaviour from others. 6. The behaviour is a dysfunctional method of coping with life and/or dealing with negative emotions. 7. The addictive behaviour generally escalates over time. 8. The person experiences large mood fluctuations and ambivalence or conflicted feelings concerning the behaviour. 9. An excessive amount of time is spent either thinking about, engaging in, or recovering from engaging in the addictive behaviour. And 10. There is a significant reduction in time spent on other and more productive activities. The key features are that the behaviour is persistent, uncontrollable, and has clearly self-destructive consequences. Many studies show relapse rates after treatment are around 80% or more, and this is regardless of the treatment method. I will speak more on these relapse rate studies later in this video. A lot of people really do struggle to change, and we are going to take a look at why this might be. The first thing we're going to look at is something called reward delayed gratification. One of the reasons people continue with self-destructive addiction behaviours is the immediate consequences or rewards from the behaviour are positive. They temporarily bring pleasure and/or remove pain, and the negative consequences of engaging in the behaviour are temporarily delayed. The exact reverse occurs when people try to abstain, where the immediate consequences of stopping will be negative, for example withdrawal, craving, or difficult to manage negative feelings, and the positive consequences of recovery from the addiction are a longer-term goal that is delayed. In the reward delayed gratification theory, it is the most immediate consequences that have the strongest impact on our behaviour. This partly explains the difficulty of breaking an addictive behavioural cycle. We are tempted to engage in instant gratification, and this is contrasted with delayed gratification, which is the ability to wait for a reward. Before any treatment is likely to be effective, it is essential that in the mind of the person with the addiction, the negative consequences of engaging in the addictive behaviour must outweigh the positive consequences, and they need also to have developed the ability to delay gratification. The next thing we're going to look at is the disease genetic concept. How professionals talk about addiction can greatly influence people's understanding of their problems. For example, believing they have the addiction gene or viewing alcohol addiction as a disease can be seen as meaning the individual is not responsible for their problems. In overcoming addiction, factors such as motivation, commitment to change, and willpower are instrumental in being able to make lasting changes. A person who views their addiction as biologically determined, either as a disease or genetic, may view the problem as outside their control, and they may be less likely to believe they have the power to change as a result. Although the disease genetic concept may be factors in why some people develop certain addictions in the first place and why some people may find it hard to change, it cannot account for those who successfully change their addictive behaviour. Additionally, it is not always a helpful concept in terms of recovery, as it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, encouraging feelings of helplessness and lack of personal responsibility that make it much more likely people will struggle to change. Now we're going to take a quick look at relapse statistics and the self-treaters concept. Relapse after treatment statistics are high at around 80%, sometimes higher, but they are misleading for three main reasons as follows. 1. The studies tend to look solely at treatment populations, but many people never present for treatment, and these people are not included in the official relapse statistics. Therefore, relapse statistics are not likely to be accurate or to reflect the population as a whole. The many people who do not present for treatment yet still recover have been termed as self-treaters or spontaneous recovery. The second point is that it may be those with more severe addiction issues are the ones that present for treatment, thus accounting for the high relapse rates. Without data on those who do not present, this remains a purely speculative assumption. The third point is the differences between these two populations, the ones that do present and those that don't, are likely to be critical. One difference with the no treatment population is that they are likely to have higher levels of independence, self-reliance and self-efficacy, which is why perhaps they felt they could stop on their own and didn't reach out for treatment. The psychological differences between these two populations could be crucial in explaining the high relapse rates of treatment populations. Next is motivation and readiness for change. Whether someone is a self-treater or has formal treatment, a high degree of personal motivation is required to successfully change addictive behaviour. Being ready for change and having the motivation to change means the negative consequences of the addiction must far outweigh any perceived benefits in the person's mind, and they need also to believe they are capable of changing. The next issue we're going to look at is expectations. Expectations are linked to motivation and readiness for change. The expected effects of the addictive behaviour are thought to be influential in determining whether an individual engages or not in the addictive behaviour. This ties in with the difficulty in delaying gratification, where people with higher positive expectations of the results of engaging in addictive behaviour will engage more often, and they will struggle to abstain. When someone focuses more on the positive aspects of their addiction, we say that they are not yet ready to change, either because they do not recognise they have a problem yet, or they fluctuate in and out of denial that they have a problem. Recognition of the problem is the foundation for developing enough motivation to change. Having negative expectations of both the short and long-term effects of the addictive behaviour indicate the person has reached problem recognition and are likely to be ready for change. The next factor is co-occurring psychological issues. Some theorists suggest that underlying psychological problems can precede and even cause the development of problematic addiction behaviours. Having psychological problems as well as an addiction issue can make it even more difficult to change. Not only do some people get drawn to addictive behaviours as a way of managing underlying psychological or mood problems, but the addiction will make any pre-existing mental health problems worse. This is illustrated by the fact that people who do not already have underlying mental health problems can and do go on to develop them as a result of their addiction. It can sometimes be difficult to know which came first, the addiction or the mental health problem. In those cases where someone has both a mental health issue and an addiction problem, recovery will be extremely unlikely unless the underlying psychological issues can be identified and treated successfully, in addition addition to treating the addiction issue. A stumbling block for many is that addiction behaviour, particularly if it involves substance use, will need to be tackled first. The reason for this is that destructive addiction behaviours are patterns that tend to contribute to, reinforce and exacerbate emotional and psychological difficulties. If the addictive behaviours are not addressed first, treatment is unlikely to succeed because it will be undermined by the addictive behaviour itself. When substances are involved, this is especially the case because they change how the brain processes information, and psychological therapies require participants to be able to access their difficult emotional material, and substance use is often engaged in precisely to keep this difficult emotional material out of awareness. This last point leads us nicely into the next factor to consider, which is the self-medication hypothesis. This assumes, specifically for users of drugs or alcohol, that they self-administer to treat their underlying psychological or emotional disturbance. The self-medication hypothesis can also apply to other non-substance addictions because of the way engaging in an addictive behaviour regardless will temporarily change brain chemistry. Individuals who are, for whatever reason, unable to deal with their negative emotions or find it difficult to have positive feelings and positive relationships can self-medicate through their addiction as a way of coping with negative feelings and/or to produce the positive feelings that cannot be achieved by other means. However, as mood and psychological disturbances develop from addictive behaviours, particularly substance use, any pre-existing mental health problems are undoubtedly made worse, not better, by addiction behaviour. The next thing we're going to look at is the psychological factors. Although the biology of addiction is important, particularly with regard to substances that produce physical dependence, psychological factors are thought to be more important when it comes to changing. The reason for this is because people generally have a high degree of emotional and motivational investment in continuing with addictive behaviour, and this is not easily overcome. Combine this with beliefs concerning responsibility for and ability to control personal behaviour, and it is easy to see why psychological factors will dominate whether a person can successfully change or not. In relation to substance use, it is not just the withdrawal symptoms, which are of limited duration, that make change difficult. Detoxification is only the first stage, after which the psychological factors that kept the addiction behaviour going must be dealt with, and it is these that most often stop people from being able to change their addictive behaviour. The next point to consider are the social factors. The importance of social factors, particularly supportive relationships, as influential in helping people change addictive behaviour. Other significant social factors are the negative health, legal and/or negative financial consequences of not changing. Relapses are thought to result from an interaction of social, psychological, situational and physiological factors that all interact with each other, so that it is not possible to specify any single factor as being predominantly responsible either for managing to change or not managing to change. The next factor is motivation, which we'll look into in a bit more detail. Motivation plays a key role at all levels of addiction, from starting it in the first place to deciding to stop and then relapsing only to attempt stopping again before final behaviour change is achieved. We tend to think of motivation as an internal state, something people either have or don't have. But motivation is influenced by many external factors, such as beliefs about responsibility and control that I mentioned earlier. Motivation is prone to fluctuation depending on what is going on externally around the person. It is not actually a fixed attribute that is either present or not in unchanging quantity. How many times have we all heard of someone who is trying to give up smoking or drinking only for them to relapse because their relationship broke up or some other external stressor negatively affected their motivation to persevere with their abstinence? Another key feature of motivation is that it must be the individual who has established their own arguments for behaviour change rather than just going along with what someone else has suggested they do. Crucial for success is the individual's commitment to stopping, their belief in the reasons why stopping the addictive behaviour is a good idea, and also that they believe they can succeed. The next factor we're going to look at is independence. Many people with addiction issues have not achieved sufficient independence from their families or partners, and the family or partner can inadvertently function in a codependent way that makes it more difficult for the person to change. Sometimes in therapy, focusing on the member of the family or partner who has the addiction problem can actually be a distraction away from a more serious and underlying dysfunction within the family or the partner relationship. The family or partner may inadvertently undermine the person's attempts to change their behaviour, as they may have a vested interest in keeping the addicted person with them in codependency. When there is a danger that change may result, this will be a loss of role potentially for the family or partner. These types of dysfunctional family or relationship patterns have been called enmeshed, and in such cases the family or partner may need to be involved in treatment or even have their own individual therapy, and the addicted person is encouraged in their therapy to detach and become less enmeshed and more independent. The next factor we're going to look at is meaning and alternative sources of reward. To successfully stop an addictive behaviour, it is essential to find new sources of reward to replace the addiction. For example, finding new sources of human acceptance and affection, and establishing new interests, new goals, and new meaning in life are all really important in order to stop an addictive behaviour. Giving up an addiction can leave a large void in an individual's life, and if it is not filled with functionally rewarding activities and rewarding relationships, then relapse is more likely. This can be one of the biggest obstacles for successful change, and the less the individual has sources of reward and interests outside their addiction, the more difficult it will be for them to change their behaviour. Sometimes people may have to change their environment and let go of some relationships if they are to succeed in changing. The last factor we're going to look at is relapses and misunderstanding relapses. A major problem that many people have when trying to stop an addictive behaviour is, rather than seeing transitions in and out of addiction as part of the process that eventually leads to recovery, the first occasion of relapse can often be misconstrued as the final outcome of trying to change, and then they don't make further attempts, as they wrongly conclude they are not capable of change just from one relapse. It is unrealistic to expect people who habitually engage in addictive behaviours to be able to stop completely and permanently at the first attempt. Lifelong and total abstinence is an unrealistic and potentially demotivating goal. People sometimes need to go round the cycle of change and in and out of abstinence several or even many times before they get to where they want to be and can maintain permanent behaviour change. As stated, sometimes people unhelpfully believe that any relapse is a sign of failure. Instead of seeing addiction as a discrete all or nothing entity that people either suffer from or do not suffer from, it may be more realistic and beneficial to concentrate on and expect the transitions between active engagement and periods of abstinence that lead to eventual recovery. In treatment, the periods of relapse after the commencement development of treatment become a valid focus of attention, as this enables people to learn valuable insight into the dynamics of their behavioural choices, which will increase their chances of remaining abstinent for longer the next time around. It is essential not to see success as an all or nothing issue. Concentration should also be on the periods of successful abstinence, however short, instead of just on the relapses, so that more positive and motivating messages are fostered and the prospects of increasing abstinence and reducing engagement in the addictive behaviour are improved. Any relapses should not be seen as inevitable or due to personal deficiency, but as a decision they made, and the person is encouraged to fully understand what led up to each decision to re-engage in the addiction and figure out what they need to do differently next time. This way of taking responsibility helps the person believe in themselves and start to get more control over their behaviour. That's a lot of information in this video, and I will just summarise the main points. There are other things that must change before the actual addictive behaviour can change. Each person will have their own particular hierarchy and configuration of what needs to change before they can successfully maintain change away from their addictive behaviour. Predominantly, each person must first recognise their addictive behaviour is problematic, accept that they are responsible for their behaviour, believe they are capable of changing it, and have developed their own arguments and motivation for doing so. Abstinence will leave a void that must be filled with new sources of reward and recreation, and if supportive and warm social relationships do not exist for the person already, they must be established, perhaps along with some social skills training if required. Engagement with the environments and people associated with the addictive behaviour should be limited or avoided where possible. Additionally, new responses to deal with potentially triggering situations and people must be learned. Any psychological problems must additionally be addressed. Whether they preceded the addiction or developed as a result of the addiction is not really relevant. Getting out of the cycle of addiction will be more difficult the more environmental, psychological and social changes a person has to make. Some people find it very easy to make a decision to stop and then they just stop. Others may require formal treatment, which can be extremely helpful provided it tackles all the areas discussed. That's it for our review of addiction issues. Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to having your company in my next video.